Like, I too would launch 1,000 ships for this woman. And I get so seasick that I would literally pass out on those ships, but I would do it. And they don't do that in the movie either. They don't tie themselves to sheep. You put all your budget in IMAX and not bigger sheep, man. But, I do also think all of this, it becomes pretty null and void when you choose to film in occupied West Sahara.
Alexei's online.
Hi, Lexi here. Welcome back to my channel, where I they them about stuff on the internet and continue to believe that the D'Angelo siblings deserved better. The Odyssey is problematic. So Christopher Nolan's nearly 3-hour movie interpretation of the ancient epic The Odyssey came out a bit ago. Both the poem and the movie focus on the story of Odysseus, who is a general from the Trojan War and the king of Ithaca, as he journeys home from Troy. His hubris causes him to offend various gods. He uses his wits to get out of situations that puts him in. It's still taught in schools. It has been interpreted and retold in books like the Percy Jackson series and the hit 2000s movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, that my friends keep telling me to watch. But there are parts of the Nolan movie version of the Odyssey and the Odyssey press tour that just got kinda weird.
Oh, also real quick, if you hear any weird noises in the background, that is my very old dog who is very clingy. And my very old dog who is very clingy would not offend the gods Poseidon and Apollo. And he also would not make a movie that caused one of the most intense movie reviews that I have ever seen from Emily Wilson.
I mean, he's a dog, but like... So I'm not gonna spend the longest amount of time on the whole casting of Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy and Elliot Page's casting as Sinon, because that's a lot of conservative bullshit. For the former, people, mostly conservatives such as pro-AI doing forced nudity chud Elon Musk, were mad that Nyong'o, who is a black woman, was being cast as Helen of Troy. See, the reason Odysseus and his bros were going to war with Troy in the first place was that Aphrodite had caused Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, who was already married to Menelaus of Sparta, to fall in love with Paris of Troy. So a bunch of other Greeks went to war with Troy to get Helen back. This is complicated a bit in the movie, I'll get to that. There's a few arguments that are happening here. One is that the casting wasn't accurate because the poem often refers to Helen as white-armed, and other historic translators and authors have described her as having golden or light hair. And firstly, I hate to break it to y'all, but Helen, she's not real. Her dad was Zeus in a swan form, man. Even beyond that, it's not like there weren't any people of African descent in Bronze Age Greece. Like, Joel Christensen, who is a Homeric scholar, pointed out that the Odyssey emerged from Ionian Greek communities in coastal Asia Minor, which had a lot of contact with, quote, surrounding cultures. Denise McCaskey, a classics professor and affiliate in Black World Studies at Miami University, told Slate that all of these golden hair descriptions Fox News keeps going on and on about might not have even been translated accurately. Quote,
"Why should we assume that golden is a hair color rather than an aura? Why wouldn't golden be something that's describing a quality of character rather than a physical description?"
I also really loved Be Not Afraid, the Dark Critical Race Theory and Classical Studies by Shelley P. Haley, who is a Black classicist. It talks a lot about the idea of Western scholars making a lot of assumptions in translation based on our present view of race and beauty. I have seen a few articles mention open letters written to Christopher Nolan's team by Greek and Greek Cypriot media platforms, but those letters tended to be on the lack of casting of Greek actors in movies about Greek antiquity. One quote I found literally said,
"We are not asking for exclusion or limitations. We are not arguing against diversity nor against representation. Greek culture itself has always been shaped by exchange, migration, and encounter across centuries. What we are asking is something simpler and more human. That when Greek stories are retold on a global stage, Greek people are not rendered invisible within them."
Which, yes, I do think there is something a little bit weird about there not being any actors with a connection to Greece in this movie, at least in the main cast, right? But I for some reason, I don't actually think that conservatives that were hiding behind the whole like Lupita Nyong'o isn't Greek argument would suddenly be fine with a Black Helen of Troy if she were also Greek. Like, some of y'all were real bad about Ksenia Daniela Karlamova, who is actually Russian, playing Svetlana in Heated Rivalry because she wasn't like book accurate or whatever. It's not about accuracy, it's about the fact that these people can't comprehend Black women being found beautiful, let alone a darker skinned Black woman being cast as the most beautiful woman in the world. Like, I too would launch 1,000 ships for this woman. And I get so seasick that I would literally pass out on those ships, but I would do it. I think a lot of the controversy around the casting of Elliot Page as Sinon also falls into this whole like culture war thing conservatives are so into. Basically, to win a really long war with Troy, Odysseus has the idea that they should build a really big wooden horse and hide in it to get past Troy's really super cool, heavily fortified walls. He and his boys leave Sinon out of the plan so that Sinon can tell the Trojans that the horse is a sacrifice for Athena. Sinon also went to Troy in place of Robert Pattinson's character, who's not on the board, sorry Robert Pattinson, but he's like one of the evil suitors that is pressuring Penelope, Odysseus's wife, to remarry while he's presumably lost at sea post-Trojan War. Sinon is like a moral through line of the movie because he was sent to war so that Robert Pattinson could look after Odysseus's son. It was really because Sparkle Vampire over there was a coward. That was the real reason. And he didn't know that the Greeks were in the horse the whole time so that he could make convincing the Trojans that the horse was really just a sacrifice for Athena, like more convincing, I guess. Anyways, Odysseus sacrificed Sinon's life and feels guilty about it. Elliot Page is transmasc, as far as I can find, he, they pronouns, and like, yes, gender variance absolutely existed in ancient Greece, but also Page is a masked person playing a masked character. Like, I'm not gonna debate, oh, his casting could have been historically accurate with anyone, the same way I'm not going to actually debate that Lupita Nyong'o's casting could be historically accurate, because these conservatives aren't actually coming from a place of caring about source material accuracy. They're coming from a place of not valuing Lupita Nyong'o and Elliot Page as people. So let's talk about the actual movie and some of the controversial changes that Nolan made from the source material. In the movie, we sort of jump between Telemachus, Odysseus' son, played by Spider-Man himself, Tom Holland, being told about his father by his mother Penelope, played by Miss Princess Diaries herself, Anne Hathaway, and Menelaus, who is not on here, as well as Odysseus telling his story to this lady Calypso, whose island he's on. Penelope is being harassed by a bunch of suitors who are living in their house and feasting on Odysseus's stuff every night. And they can't kick these suitors out because it would be breaking Zeus's law, which is basically to treat strangers and guess how you would like to be treated because they might be gods in disguise. So if Telemachus were to kill all of the suitors' families would be big mad and exile Telemachus. Telemachus eventually decides he has to sail to Sparta to get the tea from Menelaus about where his dad Odysseus might be. He thinks that Menelaus will know if his father's still alive somewhere, I guess. To hold the suitors off, Penelope has been saying that she has to weave a burial shroud for Odysseus' father, I'm pretty sure. But, like, these guys don't know anything about how long weaving takes, so she just has been unpicking the shroud every night to buy herself some more time, and this has been going on for years, and they're just like, oh yeah, I guess weaving really does take, like, years and years and years, and it makes sense that she hasn't made any progress. I guess that's just how weaving works. After several years of that, a maid rats her out to one of the suitors. In this movie, it's Mia Goth who rats her out to Robbie P. A key difference in Nolan's telling of the Odyssey is that the elders told Penelope that once she finishes the shroud, it will be time to remarry. Whereas in the translations I've read, Penelope herself says that she will remarry once she finishes the shroud. For me, even though that's a pretty small plot point, it does make a big difference because it shows that Penelope is also able to come up with these sort of underhanded schemes in the same way Odysseus does, and it makes their relationship a lot more interesting to me. I'm not really sure why Nolan felt the need for there to be these elders that are mediators. It just feels kind of like a really odd way to take away a female character's agency. Yeah, that was a really weird change to me, even though I guess it's maybe a little bit pedantic. But my issues on how Nolan changes the Odyssey when it comes to women, they don't stop at Penelope. A lot of the movie is actually Odysseus slowly remembering his story and telling it to Calypso, whose island he washes up on after his various misadventures lead to the death of the rest of his crew. The reason that Odysseus doesn't remember a lot of his journey, or that he has a wife and kid he should really be getting back to, is that Calypso has been drugging him with the lotus flower, which makes the eater forget their worries and stuff. This is combining two different plot points of the original poem. In the Odyssey poem, Odysseus and his crew stop off on the island of the Lotus Eaters, where Lotus Eaters get some of his men to eat lotus. Then Odysseus and the rest of his crew have to drag those men back to the ship because they no longer want to go home. They just want to stay on the island of the Lotus Eaters with the Lotus Eaters and eat lotus. When Odysseus does end up on Calypso's island, he doesn't stay due to amnesia. He stays because, according to him, she won't let him leave. Yet, when the goddess Athena asks Zeus to command Calypso to let Odysseus go, and he sends Hermes down to yell at her so that she does, Odysseus is able to build a pretty good boat for himself, and she does give him food and provisions. They were also, non-platonically involved. My interpretation of this bit of the poem has always been that Odysseus wasn't ready to start the long journey home or face what home might now look like for him after being gone nearly 20 years. And Nolan does try to keep with this interpretation, as Calypso tells him that he hadn't been remembering because he doesn't want to remember, not just because the lotus flower clouds the mind and saps the will, which that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That really does feel like wanting to have things both ways. This is one of the many moments of the movie where I think Christopher Nolan wants Odysseus to be both complicated because he feels guilty about the things he did in Troy, and someone who, at the end of the day, is pretty easy to categorize as the hero. Put a pin in that. Something I did actually think was really interesting about the movie was the fact that there weren't definitely gods. In Homer's telling of the Odyssey, Athena talks directly to Odysseus and his son, like, a lot. She disguises Odysseus magically, that kind of thing. In the movie, Odysseus actually doesn't believe in the gods until things get real bad for him on his Odyssey home. We do get some signs that could be and are interpreted by the characters as gods intervening. There's a scene where Telemachus is sort of threatening the suitors, and you can hear thunder rumbling as if Zeus is agreeing with him. The beggar that he was defending says that this is simply a case of lucky timing. Going back to Calypso's island real quick, Odysseus tells her that he can feel he has a home somewhere, and thunder sounds. Then we switch to Calypso urging him not to eat the lotus flower and to remember instead. This, in my opinion, replaces Hermes going to Calypso to tell her that Zeus says that she needs to let Odysseus go. Calypso is interpreting the thunder and the wind as the gods talking to her. My friend's dad actually interpreted some of the lingering shots of the ocean or the sky as the gods being present in the movie. The only god you do actually see is Athena, who is played by Zendaya. Like I said, Odysseus starts seeing her once his crew gets mutinous and things just get real bad. And it's also implied that he talks to her quite often on Calypso's island. However, we find out in a flashback towards the end of the movie that Zendaya also plays a young woman that he saw get brutally murdered at Troy. So it's possible Zendaya, as Matt Damon sees her for most of the movie, is not literally Athena, but a manifestation of Odysseus's guilt that he talks to. Christopher Nolan has said that, quote,
I became more interested in the idea that to people in that period, evidence of gods was everywhere. The wonderful thing about cinema, and IMAX in particular, is that you can take an audience to a place of immersion. You want the audience to be on the boat with them, fearing the ocean, fearing the wrath of Poseidon, the way the characters do. That, to me, is so much more powerful than any individual image you can have of a god.
IMAX is like a special type of film. Basically, this might be like the only or one of the only movies to be filmed entirely in IMAX. There are only like 360 or so IMAX theaters in the US, and tickets to shows in them are more expensive than your average movie ticket, which really is already expensive. So I don't super think that relying on IMAX to convey gods to the audience was the best bet, but the overall idea of getting the audience to see gods in the ways that the characters see gods is really interesting to me. I also think it plays into Nolan's interest in Zeus's law, which is talked about quite a bit in the movie.
But that concept of we have to treat others as we'd be treated, this is the golden rule, if you like. As I analysed the poem and as I looked at how to adapt it, I realised how central it is to a world where, when you leave the house, by definition, if you're more than a day or two away from home, you are completely at the mercy of strangers. And so that code was the backbone of civilization.
For Nolan, it's sort of a way that both Bronze Age Greeks and his characters could protect themselves while on the road, and it relies entirely on shared faith. Now, do I think the whole no gods thing falls apart when you have mythical creatures like sirens and Scylla and Charybdis and the Cyclops? Yeah, a bit. But I also can appreciate that it is an ambitious and sort of new idea. Let's talk about that Cyclops scene. I feel like that is one of the most famous scenes in the Odyssey. Basically, Odysseus and his men land on an island with a bunch of really nice sheep. They go to explore and find a cave that's clearly inhabited and it has like cheese and stuff in it. It's good cheese, apparently. The men want to just grab the sheep and cheese and go back to the ship, like take out at your local restaurant style, but Odysseus wants to meet whoever lives there to see if they honor Zeus's law. Unfortunately, the guy that lives there does not follow Zeus's law. He's a Cyclops called Polyphemus who eats people. Now, Polyphemus starts eating 2 of Odysseus's men in the morning and 2 at night because breakfast is the most important meal of the day. They can't just like all run away while he's sleeping or kill him in his sleep because he put a big ass rock over the entrance to the cave. What I will say is that I did really like how the Cyclops scenes were filmed. The sound design was really cool to me, and I also really loved the character design. Like, I just really thought the scenes were really cool. However, in the poem, Odysseus realizes he has to come up with a kind of douchey plan to get out of there. So he gives the Cyclops a bunch of wine they brought with them just in case the cave owner was a chiller. He also tells the Cyclops that his name is Nobody. So later that night, while the Cyclops is sleeping it off, Odysseus and his boys take a big stick that they've been sharpening and stick it in the Cyclops' eye. So then he's blind. And Polyphemus, Cyclops' neighbors, are like, dude, why are you screaming, my guy? And Polyphemus is like, nobody is trying to kill me. So the other Cyclops just think he's like sick and don't help. The next day, Odysseus and the boys tie themselves to the undersides of sheep, and the Cyclops can't see that, so he's just like relying on touch to like feel the tops of the sheep. So that's the way that they sneak out. And they don't do that in the movie either. They don't tie themselves to sheep. You put all your budget in IMAX and not bigger sheep, man? As they're sailing out, though, Odysseus yells, "Hey, Cyclops, we escaped, na 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 na." And I guess the Cyclops can hear super well because he hears all the way up from on his cliff, and then he throws a really big rock at them, and it misses. And even though Odysseus's men are begging him not to, he then yells, "Hey, Polyphemus, guess what my name is? It's really Odysseus, not Nobody, and I blinded you, so tell everybody that if somebody asks." Which then at that point, Polyphemus is like, yeah, I'm gonna pray to my dad, Poseidon, to make Odysseus' journey home worse than a Spirit Airlines flight. God, I miss Spirit Airlines so bad every day. This part of the story shows that Odysseus is able to use his wits and get out of seemingly impossible situations, but also that he often puts himself and his crew in those situations in the first place. Like, he wouldn't have had to think of a way to get out of the cave if he had just listened to his men and stolen some of Polyphemus's cheese, and his journey home would have been much quicker and had a much higher survival rate if he hadn't told Polyphemus his real name. Now, Christopher Nolan doesn't have Polyphemus and Odysseus endure intense conversation or whatever. He has his Cyclops be the only inhabitant of the island and not speak until his eye is stabbed out, at which point he is in the corner praying to his father Poseidon. Before the eye stabbing, some of Odysseus's men managed to get out of the cave by rushing past the Cyclops, and Odysseus actually also got out of the cave, but then he decided to go back for the rest of his men. And instead of yelling at Polyphemus, he shoots him with his bow and arrow, which, like, usually he plucks his bow first to warn his target so that it's a fair fight or whatever, but here he doesn't. Christopher Nolan has said that he didn't include that whole nobody sequence because it's based on a pun in ancient Greek.
It's a pun. Puns in translation are tough. I tried. It was not possible to work in it.
So per The Hollywood Reporter, quote,
In Homer's version, the clever Odysseus, Matt Damon in the film, encounters the murderous Cyclops in his cave. Odysseus first tells the creature his name is Nobody, Autos in Greek.
so that's the pun. Odysseus sounds like Autos or Otis. But I also think it wasn't included because this movie is about a different kind of Odysseus. See, Nolan has talked a bit about how his version of the Odyssey is about war and its aftermath.
In some respects, the Odyssey was a sequel to Oppenheimer. When I think about Oppenheimer, what so stayed with me in that movie was the weight that Oppenheimer must have felt when he saw the reality of what he had created. And the Odyssey feels like a journey of a man reckoning with what he had done in war and what war does to men. And
I'm very much, I feel like you certainly watched the film the way I intended, and I think by the end that connection is made. You know, the interpretation of the Odyssey, what it could mean, the idea of these extraordinary events of the Trojan War, and also all this. Yeah, we wanted to try and wrestle with it, you know, in a modern sense, to try and say, okay, what if these things were real? What if we were there? What would it be like? You know, what would the resonance be? What would the gravity of the situation be?
Hey, so I realized I didn't explain a kind of important part of the whole Odyssey anti-war thing. Basically, in Nolan's Odyssey, the whole Helen getting kidnapped by Troy and being with Paris is actually an excuse to have a war because Menelaus and Agamemnon really want to get control of the trade routes, and they think that this war will help them take the trade routes from Troy. So it's kind of a like, oh, they were looking for any excuse to do war. His version of Odysseus spends the movie feeling an all-consuming guilt over the whole Trojan horse thing. In his view, to win the war, he exploited Zeus's law, which is, again, an overarching theme in the movie. His Athena, like I said, takes the form of an innocent girl that his side, the Greeks, killed at Troy. And a lot of the movie is Odysseus trying to do the right thing after doing this horrible thing in Troy because of all that guilt, which I do think actually makes him a less interesting character. But also, this movie is an adaptation. Nolan has talked a bit about casting well-known faces to make this story feel much more relatable to modern audiences. And I think Odysseus not being extremely underhanded towards the Cyclops or having affairs even though his ultimate goal is to return home to his faithful wife does sort of make more sense in that appealing to modern audiences context. There's a lot of talk in the movie about Ithaca needing a strong leader and Penelope needing to remarry to accomplish this so that they're prepared to defend their nation from the people from the sea, which is a mysterious group of voyaging peoples that don't respect Zeus's law. It's revealed towards the end of the movie that the people from the sea are actually Greeks and that their underhanded attacks are a sign that the age of respecting Zeus's law / the age of bronze is coming to an end, but eventually civilization will rise again. And like, yeah, people in the time of the Odyssey weren't talking about the Bronze Age, and the whole people from the sea thing has been largely debunked within real historical context, and I think that an Odyssey where Odysseus remained a complicated man could still have gotten Nolan's anti-war point across. But as I discussed at the beginning of the video, the Odyssey, it's not real. I flip-flop between this like nerdy, well, one of the points of epics like the Odyssey was how accurately they could be retold by bards and griots, which, side note, I love the idea of casting a rapper to play that role, and I do agree with Emily Wilson that I wish he'd been given some more to do. And I also kind of, part of that flip-flopping is this media study-y. Well, a lot of these stories told us about the anxieties of the people of the day, and interpretations of Odysseus actually changed over time, and people started to see him a bit more as an antagonist because he was somebody that was so good with words. So then, like, in that vein, I think it's really interesting to make an Odyssey that more heavily plays into anxieties on war and the erosion of basic human kindness, with the hopeful ending about values of peace and caring for one another becoming the norm again. That's the little pin that we were talking about, by the way. But, I do also think all of this it becomes pretty null and void when you choose to film in occupied West Sahara. So the Odyssey was filmed in 91 countries, including several locations in Morocco. However, 4 days were spent filming in the Morocco-occupied territory of Dakhla, home to the Sahrawi people. Sorry if I'm pronouncing any of this wrong. I found various pronunciations online. As far as I've found, Nolan has not responded to requests for comment from varying news outlets about this choice. I'm going to read a quote from the Western Sahara International Film Festival, FISAHARA's executive director. Quote,
"When Christopher Nolan steps on the red carpet on his way to the premiere screening, he will also be stepping on international law, specifically the right of the Sahrawi people to their territory and resources, which are being illegally exploited by Morocco and the Sahrawis to make their own films there without fear of imprisonment. This one-year silence amounts to a deliberate choice to be complicit to Morocco's illegal and brutal occupation of the Western Sahara. The Sahrawi people continue to suffer from enforced displacement, land grabbing, and forced exile amounting to ethnic cleansing as Morocco tries to implement its settler colonial project and make the occupation permanent. We ask the public to treat this film as they would a movie made in occupied Ukraine with Putin's permits, or in the illegal settlements in Palestine with Netanyahu's blessings."
Sahrawi filmmaker Brahim Chagot says,
"Christopher Nolan has had 1 year to learn about the land from which my family was forced to flee in 1975 under white phosphorus bombs. I grew up in the Sahrawi refugee camp in Algeria, and today, as a Sahrawi filmmaker from the occupied city of Dakhla, I cannot freely enter my homeland to tell my own stories. That is the great contradiction behind this landscape. While a few privileged people, like Nolan, can turn it into a movie, others are still waiting for the day when we can simply return to it."
the Moroccan government offers incentives like 30% cash rebates and at times assets from its frickin' military to those filming TV shows and movies in Morocco. The director of the CCM, which is the government institution in charge of Moroccan film regulation and promotions, responded to the question, does this shoot open up new perspectives for Dakhla?
"Not being known as a filming city, Dakhla would indeed offer in the future extraordinary possibilities to foreign productions that will find human resources as well as very different geography from other regions of Morocco."
I do just want to note that this original article was in French and it is just default translated on Firefox for me. Foreign production being filmed in Dakhla, facilitated by Morocco and incentivized through its rebates and other perks, gives Western powers a stake in the Morocco government's continued occupation of the land. If the Sahrawi people get their land back, then the US won't be able to film there cheaply anymore. Occupied Dakhla was the setting of Calypso's island. Of filming there, Nolan says, quote,
"The joke was, at each location you'd think, well, the next location is going to be easier." He was relieved to reach a beach in Morocco for his final scenes, the sandy paradise where Odysseus encounters the nymph Calypso. "It turned out to be like kitesurfing capital of the world," he says. "It was so windy, the sand was just ripping into our eyes, and there was absolutely nothing we could do to block the sand."
You know, maybe this all would have been a little quicker if you didn't have to change IMAX film every 3 fucking minutes, man. It's really interesting to me that this occupied territory, whose peoples have been and continue to be subjected to violence, suppression, media blackouts, expulsion, which are all in violation of international law as confirmed by the UN International Court of Justice and the EU's highest court, is the setting of a supposed paradise that, in Nolan's movie, Odysseus is tricked into staying at, Calypso's island. And Nolan has the nerve to whine about the fucking sand. Oh yeah, the sand was really bad in this area that was supposed to be peaceful, that people are being human rights violated in. Oh, my life is so hard, I'm Christopher Nolan. Like, what, dude? Now let's play a fun game called Where Will Editing Alexi Decide to Put This Segment? So Zendaya also came under fire during the press tour of the Odyssey for wearing 3,000-year-old Iranian earrings that are currently owned by Baron London. One of the really big issues with wearing artifacts like this is we don't actually know how they got to these Western organizations that now own them. Founder of the Forensic Archive of Iran, which independently investigates and archives threats to Iran's cultural heritage, said of the earrings,
Baron London has described the loan as a celebration of ancient Persian artistry, but cultural appreciation cannot substitute for provenance transparency.
Provenance is basically like documents showing who had an object when, stretching back from its
discovery.
Dr. Christos Syrogiannis, who is an antiquities expert at Swiss Federal Office of Culture and focuses on antiquity provenance, says that about 90% of antiquities, like the earrings, are eventually found to be, quote,
illicit or lacking in provenance, lacking documentation.
This is all often code for they were grave robbed and trafficked to Europe. I think it is worth noting that white celebrities also have a tendency to wear artifacts with unknown provenance. Like Margot Robbie wore what's currently known as the Taj Mahal diamond to the Wuthering Heights premiere earlier this year. The diamond that is the centerpiece of this necklace that she wore was owned by Elizabeth Taylor and now belongs to Cartier. But before it was part of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's turbulent romance, it was given to Noor Jahan by her husband, Mughal Emperor Jahangir. The diamond actually has her name, the number of years Jahangir had been on the throne, which was 23, and the Hijri date 1037. I found the headlines covering Margot Robbie's wearing of Noor Jahan's necklace pretty different from the headlines covering Zendaya's wearing of the 3,000-year-old Iranian earrings, probably because Noor Jahan's necklace has a longer public association with whiteness. Elizabeth Taylor and Margot Robbie is a white woman. To be clear, I don't think either of them should be wearing these items, particularly because of who currently owns them. But I do want to point out this disparity in coverage because there has just been so much anti-Black racism and just general misogynoir surrounding the Odyssey. There's a scene in Nolan's Odyssey that I really continued to struggle with. After Odysseus catches his men eating the sun god Apollo's cattle, which he was warned by the witch Circe would cause their death and had warned his men about in turn, he has a conversation with Athena where she asks him why he keeps blaming himself for his men's actions. I struggle with this scene despite its gorgeous lighting because in a vacuum, Athena hallucination is right. At the end of the day, we're not in charge of other people's actions. This is especially true in Nolan's Odyssey, where the existence of gods is up to audience interpretation. If they aren't real, then Poseidon hasn't cursed Odysseus and his men because of Odysseus's actions, and his men were always meant to die whether or not they ate that cattle because again, Apollo isn't real. But at the same time, I really hate the idea of wiping our hands of responsibility for each other completely. Like the poem, the movie ends with Odysseus coming home and slaughtering all of the suitors. Unlike the poem, he's then banished for violating Zeus's law. He and Penelope leave Telemachus in charge of Ithaca and sail away to honor the men Odysseus couldn't bury and also, do adventure, I guess. In Nolan's movie, Odysseus has to leave Ithaca. In the original poem, though, Odysseus does actually leave Ithaca one more time. After killing the suitors, he does something that he was instructed to do on his journey. He walks inland with an oar until he is so far from the sea, a person asks him what the oar is even for, is it a tool for threshing grain? What is this shit? He then plants the oar in the ground to honor his men and Poseidon. Only then can he truly permanently return home. Odysseus is already home in Ithaca before this, and he could just choose to not do the final thing, but he does do it to make amends. The end of Nolan's movie, in my opinion, removes Odysseus' choice to do better. It's just sort of how are we going to be better than, the people in our community and the people in power that are people from the Seeing It Up if we don't choose to take responsibility for each other. Also, I don't get why their armor is so clean. They've been to war. Why is there not a dent or a scratch in there? Come on, y'all. What I will also say is that I do appreciate that this movie is getting more people into theaters because I love my local theaters, and encouraging people to read, especially at a time where AI companies are buying up and destroying rare books. Thank you so much for watching. My outro song is Take a Vacation by the Young Vanes, unless Sony Music has finally decided that my remix of it is not good enough and copyright struck me permanently. All channel art is by me. Like, comment, subscribe, all of those things really do mean a lot to me. If you want to be alerted every time I post a new video, hit that notification button You know that little bell? And if you don't, that's okay. I won't be offended. Sometimes that bell annoys me, man. But yeah, thank you so much again, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye now.